Everyone, thank you for fronting up again. This is the third of 4 in the series of Q&A for new Buddhists. And so we've had the 3 refuges first, the Buddha Dhamma Sangha and how it can support your practice. Then last week we had the 5 precepts that are followed by lay people. Again, laying the foundation for your practice. So today, we are going to look at the outline. It's just an outline of the 4 Noble Truths. Now, this is the heart of the Buddha's teachings. And so it's a huge topic, but the outline is a good place to start so that you can then refer to the literature and get more information as you go along. I have got a reference list that was we've just run out of, but I can photocopy for the next session, so those who missed out can collect a copy. And this gives you YouTube 6 sessions done by Bhikkhu Bodhi, 2018. It's just a wonderful teacher. So I'll bring it next time. So, as I've quoted here from the Buddha's suttas that have come down through the ages to us, the Buddha is supposed to have said, "I teach only suffering and the end of suffering." I think there's a bit of a misconception about Buddha's teaching where people think it's only suffering. But actually, yes, he's teaching us suffering, but the end of suffering is what it's about. In fact, there's another place where he's quoted, "Just as the great oceans have only one taste, so the teachings of the Buddha, the taste of liberation." So this is about true happiness, liberation. But this is where we start. Now, dukkha, or suffering, is usually translated as unsatisfactoriness. And it doesn't really capture the wide sense in which the Buddha used this word. We'll talk a bit more about that when I expand on dukkha, the first of the 4 Noble Truths. This discourse, the 4 Noble Truths, was the very first discourse given by the Buddha following his enlightenment. And it was given to 5 disciples, far fewer than in the audience today. The 5 disciples who were practicing with him ascetic practices until the Buddha charted his own path, drifted away from them, but then soon after his enlightenment, thought of these people who supported him and went to them first to explain the Dhamma, the path that he had discovered. And this was in the Saranath Deer Park near Varanasi. So it's a fair walk from Bodh Gaya, where he became enlightened, all the way to Saranath. And this discourse is called setting in motion the wheel of the Dhamma. So this wheel was set in motion 2,500 years ago. It's still turning, and I hope it will turn for many more years to come. It's also referred to as the elephant's footprint because it gives this framework into which all of the Buddha's teachings fit. So like the elephant's footprint, which can contain within it all the footprints of all the other animals, so this framework is the framework that outlines the whole teaching, and you'll find all the discourses, that subsequent discourses, lead back to exploring some aspect of the 4 Noble Truths. And the Buddha was an amazing teacher. you can see as you read the discourses how, first of all, he sets it out in a very systematic, kind of scientific way, what he's going to teach, what this teaching involves. And then in the discourses, you find somebody comes with a particular question, or he understands that this person is coming from this angle. So he doesn't dive into the Four Noble Truths. He explores what that person is bringing in. And then slowly you find yourself that he has led you to some aspect of the Four Noble Truths, which will help that person to understand and come to grips. And quite often, some of these people immediately attained enlightenment because obviously their past karma was such that they could very quickly understand and see for themselves the Dhamma that the Buddha was teaching. So, in this discourse, the Buddha gives an outline of suffering, its cause, that there is an end, and there's a path that leads to the end of suffering. It's very appealing to me because it sort of has this medical kind of model where you make a diagnosis first, and then you say, this is the cause of the problem. Then the prognosis, is this treatable or is it not? And then here's the treatment that we propose. So it's so beautifully set out. Now, let me scroll down a bit. Ooh. Something happened there. I might have to get Carl to retrieve that first talk. I've just jumped to the references from the YouTube. Can I go back? Oh, I thought it was going to be... have I closed it? Okay. All right. Then can I open the Q&A? That one. And the Four Noble Truths as of September. Yeah, that's it. That's the document. Okay. And then I'll make it as big as I can. And then I just want to scroll down. So I'll be right, I think. If I just... Okay. So the Four Noble Truths. The Noble Truth of dukkha, as I said, it describes the unsatisfactoriness that is intrinsic to human existence. This has to be fully understood. And the Buddha gives his amazing elaboration of suffering. He knew this intimately. And then when we look into it, we can see all the things that we gloss over, that covers everything up for us, is explode. So, birth, aging, illness, death, this is suffering. Now, we know that. If we stop for a pause for a moment, we know that. There's no doubt about it. Then there's sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. This psychological suffering, he breaks it down to all these different types, and then he breaks this down even further. So these also strike us to the bone when we encounter various losses. But there are subtler forms that are also, that we may not consider as suffering. So, union with what is displeasing, separation from what is pleasing. You can see this in relationships, how painful it is. Not to get what one wants is suffering. This happens quite a lot. And then he says, in brief, the 5 aggregates of clinging are suffering. we have to come back to this later because this is the subtlest level of suffering. And the 5 aggregates is what this is composed of. Form, body, rupa, this is form. Then there's feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. This is the next aggregate. Then the next aggregate is perception. We can see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and mental impressions. The 4th cluster, aggregate, is thought, volition, memory, all that kind of thinking. And then finally, the 5th aggregate is consciousness, our basic awareness that allows us to experience all of these other things. And when he says these are the aggregates of clinging, these lumps or groups of phenomena that we are made up of, these are all transient. These are momentary things. You can't see my body changing every moment or your own changing every moment, but it is. And all the others, feelings, perceptions, thought formations, consciousness, don't last even this long. But because of the continuation, we cling. These are the aggregates that help us to cling to life, want more, you know, and forms this sense of me, you know. So that's the 5 aggregates of clinging. Now, let's move on to the second noble truth of origin of dukkha. So what is the cause? What is the fundamental cause of this suffering, this dukkha? Craving. Now, craving, the Pali term is tanha, which is thirst. It's just so strong, right? Some of our cravings we can see are much stronger than others, but the Buddha classified craving into these 3 basic areas. First, craving for sense pleasure. Whoa, you know, we all know how strong that can be. Craving for existence. We become aware of this only when our existence is threatened usually, but it's there all the time. And this craving for existence is why we eat, why we do things, why we create families, you know. This is craving for existence. Then craving for non-existence. This sounds a bit strange, right? But there are times when we don't want to exist anymore. It's unbearable. But this also has a more nuanced explanation, but certainly I can stay at this level. And even Sigmund Freud talked about one is the drive for sense pleasures, the life, the libido, the life instinct, but then he also talked about the death instinct, because that was many, many, many years after the Buddha. But, you know, suicide would be the kind of fairly extreme form of acting on that wish to not exist. And, you know, suffering can become quite unbearable sometimes. So then, the Buddha says there is cessation. There is a possibility of cessation, this noble truth. And that is called nibbana. The ultimate cessation, the liberation is nibbana. And he says this is to be realized through the cessation of craving. So, if we somehow can overcome craving, then that leads to cessation of suffering, or nibbana. And this is to be realized. Now, he described the path leading to cessation of dukkha. craving is not something we can just decide, right, I'm going to give this up or whatever. It just doesn't work like that. We can restrain ourselves. We can use the 5 precepts. We can, guide ourselves to be restrained. These things help for the craving to not just run away from us, but it does not lead to the cessation of craving. So he described the path leading to the cessation of dukkha, which is through cessation of craving. And that path is called the middle path, or the Noble Eightfold Path. And this path is to be developed if you wish to experience liberation. So, do you mind if I keep going on with the 4th Noble Truth, elaborating the 4th? And then we can ask questions after. Okay. So, there are 8 factors in this Eightfold Path, and it's divided into 3 sections. I'll just try and get that into the picture. Right. So, the first 2, right view and right intention, are your wisdom segment of the path. The second, wisdom, is followed by their virtue or Sila. So virtue is captured in the next 3, right speech, right action, right livelihood. And so this virtue has to be developed as part of this Eightfold Path. And then meditation, which most of you are interested in and is what's drawn you to here in the first place. But meditation also has these 3 paths to it that need to be developed. So we'll go through the wisdom, virtue, and meditation. Let's break it down now. Now, right view, the very first, you need right view to even begin the path. Without right view, well, you wouldn't, certainly not undertake this path. In right view, when we elaborate it more, first of all, it means some grasp, some understanding of the 4 Noble Truths, that there is dukkha, that this may be how it is caused, that there may be the end of suffering, and there may be a path to arrive at this liberation. So right view has to have some idea that there is suffering, there is a need to develop this path. And the other aspect of right view is also some understanding of the principle of karma. Karma is volition or intention. And of course, everything that leads from intention, speech and action. And this is because if there was no idea that what we intend, what we do, what we say, if we think these things have no consequences, then what is the point of following this path? But if we think that these do have consequences, at least in this life, but in a Buddhist sense in your future lives and have in the past lives, that if this has no consequence, then you won't be looking into trying to alleviate your suffering through this path. And the other thing is right view, being essentially the 4 Noble Truths or some understanding of it. Right view is kind of where you begin, but it's also where you end in this wheel of the Dhamma. So when you have fully grasped and realized this path, then there is complete wisdom. So it develops bit by bit, and you kind of develop it to this level of enlightenment, which is ultimately what we are seeking. So that is wisdom. Then, as part of developing wisdom, we have to have right intention. So, this I will elaborate again in the next talk. It's the intention to renunciation, so the letting go becomes important. Intention to non-harmful action, so you relinquish hatred and intent to harm. And the third is compassion, which is very similar, but there are nuances. So that intention has to be there also to follow this path. If there was no intention to renunciation, no intention for non-harm, no intention for compassion, well, renunciation, metta, loving kindness, and non-harm. If there was no intention, well, you wouldn't be following this path. Then, virtue. We talked last time about the 5 precepts, which is your basic level of ethical conduct. So, but here we start with right speech, which was actually the 4th precept, to avoid telling that which is not true, harsh speech, divisive speech, empty chatter, all of these things which create mental turbulence and potential harm to yourself, but other people as well. So right speech is an important aspect of Sila. Now, those of you who have been to meditation retreats will know that we take right speech to the other extreme, where we declare noble silence and you're not allowed to say anything, which really protects right speech for the time of the retreat. And you see how the mental chatter slowly, slowly, slowly settles, and peace just from that silence. And sometimes I find it difficult to break the silence at the end of the retreat. You really don't want to talk, you know. It fades very quickly though. So right speech, right action. Now, some of this was covered in the 5 precepts. Not to kill. Not to take that which is not given to you, the 2nd precept. Avoiding harmful sexual conduct. And 5th precept, which was avoiding alcohol and anything intoxicating the mind, which will cloud your judgment and your mindfulness. So, right action covers all of that. Then, right livelihood, which kind of brings all that together. So that we, of course, most of us as lay people have to find a way of earning our livelihood, supporting ourselves. So there are occupations which are conducive to good livelihood. There are others which cause a lot of harm to a lot of people, whether it's killing, weapons, poisons, the slavery. There's many things that people, deceitful practices in various businesses. So there are so many ways in which we can go against right livelihood, which means it doesn't support our practice towards liberation. Then we've got the last 3, which is the meditation block. Samadhi. So the first of those 3 is right effort. Now, I used to think right effort means, you know, you really have to try very hard, you know, sit on your cushion and all this sort of. There's some of that, but right effort actually has a fairly defined meaning, which is to avoid unwholesomeness that has not arisen, and to overcome unwholesomeness which has arisen. So, unskillful thoughts, unwholesome thoughts, for example, based on greed, hatred, and delusion, right? So when we see greed, hatred, delusion, the idea is to not cultivate that, but to rather see if we can allow those to fade and know the causes that will help those unwholesome side of thought to subside. The other side of right effort is the opposite, to generate and perpetuate wholesome thought, speech, and action. So anything that's based on generosity, non-greed, in other words, non-hatred, non-delusion. These are to be cultivated. And when they're there, keep them going. So that is the right effort. And boy, sometimes it's very difficult when you've got some grudge whirring away to let it go. And if somebody says forgive, you think, oh, you know, it's not easy. But this is why it's right effort. It's effort. And then we go to right mindfulness, which is sati. We talk a lot about mindfulness these days because that's taught, which is good. It's about that present moment awareness, which helps us to see things deeply rather than just skirt over everything superficially, which is how we normally live. So that mindfulness also, there is a discourse which elaborates the ways in which mindfulness is cultivated, centered around the body, centered around feelings, centered around thought, and centered around certain aspects which are called the Dhammas. So these 4 foundations of mindfulness you will come across if you browse around in the discourses. But right mindfulness, you can use any of those foundations to develop that present moment deep awareness. And that helps whether you are Buddhist or not. That mindfulness brings a lot of peace, calm, and generally being able to live skillfully. Again, difficult skill to develop. Then finally, right concentration. So whatever you build up with right effort and right mindfulness will lead you to develop much more easily right concentration, samadhi. And so most of the time at our retreats we teach the breath meditation, anapanasati, so you can use the breath to develop one-pointedness, the concentration, the bringing together of the mind in a way that makes it very sharp, able to cut through and go deep into mind states and calm, deeply calming mind states, and eventually called the jhanas, which are quite deep states of concentration. So the thing to remember is that these 8-fold, these 8 factors, path factors, they are not sequential factors. Everything gets developed right along the way, bit by bit of Sila that sort of improves, and bit of samadhi which starts to take on a bit of momentum, and then wisdom creeps in which helps you to keep the whole thing going. So it's not sequential, but all aspects have to be developed, each enhancing the other. When the path develops and matures, it leads to awakening or liberation through direct insight into the true nature of existence. So the true nature of existence, having been described by the Buddha as impermanence, suffering, and no self, no permanent abiding self. So these characteristics have to be known directly. We can understand some of it conceptually. We can understand suffering conceptually. We can understand impermanence because, you don't look the same in the mirror each year, Things change, you're changing. Your bones are creaking, you know things are changing. So there's impermanence. And at a conceptual level also you can understand, you can say, yeah, but that momentary impermanence we don't see until you develop mindfulness and concentration. Then there is no doubt that this is happening. And that there's this illusion that we're all somehow this one bundle that's going to stay this way, not 5 aggregates which are falling apart all the time. So the seeing of that is the liberation, basically. So that's a summary, that's an outline of the Four Noble Truths. And next time, we will spend more time on each of those 8 path factors. So, time for questions. And Priya is here as well. And there's a roving microphone so we can keep a record of some of the questions that come up. I'll put the Noble Truths up first so you can ask about that and whether you think that the Buddhist teaching is completely miserable and we should be all walking around with long faces.
I must have explained it too well.
No questions. Yeah, so having listened to all these talks, is your view of the world beginning to change a bit? So that's the main thing really, the way you look at everything. That's what the Buddha said. What appears as pleasure to some can always lead to dukkha again. But basically it's a mind training exercise. So
mind developing of the mind.
Yeah, developing. And you saw what Geetha mentioned, the wheel of the Dhamma. That's that symbol there. It tells you the 8 ways in which you can develop your mind. And right view, look at the world not as it is presented to you by others. Sit and think for yourself. And the more time you devote to your mind, you find you start changing your view of the world. When we went to Sunday school, we were always told, watch the 3 doors. The 3 doors being your mind, speech, and action. So that goes together as soon as you... And that's right, mindfulness. Always think before you do something, say something. It's action on the recipient. And again, that ties in with the 5... so the way you conduct yourself.
It's so easy not to think, isn't it? We kind of, so much of our part of our life, we are on autopilot. And then suddenly you say something and you think, oh, did I say that? Or do that? Yeah.
Yes,
I was going to ask a question. You likened it to the medical model at one stage. And with the medical model, I'd imagine we see an illness and there's a cure for illness. But with suffering, it's like a mental thing as much as anything. It's not a cure for suffering, it's just relief from suffering. Is that right? You're not actually trying to extinguish suffering, like with the medical side of things. You're actually trying to cure. You're not actually trying to cure in this instance, are you?
You are. You are. That's the thing with the Buddha. The path actually starts at his wish to understand happiness, because with the notion that we all beings seek happiness. But then he realized that this happiness is a very fleeting thing. We refer to pleasure as happiness, and then it all ends and it all falls apart. And so this is not true happiness, is what he said. It appears to be happiness, but it's not true happiness because of this condition, this suffering, that underpins our existence, impermanence, suffering, and non-self. And because we don't understand that, we suffer, right? Because we expect life to be different to how it is. And his cessation is total cessation, is what he's going for. What he's teaching is total liberation. So this goes beyond medical cure.
Is that possible in your lifetime to cease suffering?
Apparently, it is. We do understand that we work, or we are on this journey lifetime after lifetime, slowly, slowly developing these factors. But it does say that you can attain this liberation in one life. And there is even a place in the Satipatthana Sutta where he says, if you sincerely devote to this practice for 7 years, 7 months, 7 weeks, or 7 days, you can reach nibbana. So, you know.
It's basically about reducing craving, really, because the more you know, and as soon as you satisfy one craving, you want another. And that's why it goes on and on. Whatever you have, it's never enough. And so that's one form of suffering. You're always wanting something. And by simplifying your way of living, being, you know, not relying on others to provide you with sense pleasures. In this world, we have a lot of that now. You know, your day isn't full unless you have watched something or done something or listened to music. And very soon you're much older and there isn't much time left to develop your thinking, develop right view. And of course, all these pleasures, etc., quite often lead to problems. Too much eating and drinking, you become fat, and then you're trying to become thin again. So to do everything in moderation, but it's all done by mindfulness. Whatever you do, think before you do it. Well, you were about to ask a question, weren't you?
I do have a question, but I haven't formulated it well.
Right.
But I thought I'd put it out there anyway. Mm-hmm. The second noble truth, and it says, is to be abandoned, which is abandon craving for non-existence. Now, I'm not asking this for to be difficult or to pose a tricky question. I just don't understand. There's a section here I don't get, and that is, isn't that what we're all trying to move towards?
Okay. It's a good question. Mm-hmm. It is a bit, I think I understand it at a very simple level. Craving for sense pleasures, I totally understand. Craving for ongoing existence, totally understand. Non-existence, I do understand when I see that when people are in a situation where suicide clings to. But you're talking about the fact that we are saying here that we are aiming to liberation and to stop this samsara altogether, which you're saying is non-existent. In a way, yes, but actually it's not, because the kind of non-existence we are craving is another craving, which will lead to more existences. This is not the non-existence that we are talking about in nibbana. No.
I don't know, but I think in my mind that Ajahn Brahma's not coming back again.
Right.
I probably will come back many times. However, his practice is leading towards
Liberation.
But not the craving of.
Not the craving of non-existence, and also liberation is not non-existence either. Now this is very interesting, because the Buddha was asked by many people in many ways, what is nibbana? How, can you explain it like this? Can you explain it like that? And he would always say, it's beyond words. It is for you to experience. and it is not a non-existence either. So,
And it's not craving. You would not be craving.
no, we desire liberation, especially when suffering is felt rather badly, but working, that's a wholesome desire to overcome suffering. Craving implies something more, where we are driven, even in meditation you find people are craving for the next level of, this is still craving. This is not letting go. So ultimately it's a letting go that is the renunciation and the path to overcoming craving. But we have to start where we are at, which is to diminish. And if you understand, this is why wisdom is the thing that cuts to the root all of this. If you can, even at a simple level, if you can see that this thing brings me happiness for 2 minutes, why am I doing this? And then it's accompanied by pain or whatever. You know, I had a problem with my gut and certain foods really upset me, but it took me a while to say, look, stop it. Because every time you understand cause and effect, but you're still, so when you really see it and you think, oh dear, finish. I don't want it anymore. It's just not. So it cuts it, you know, because of wisdom. But you have to see it a lot of times before you can really see that this is suffering inflicted by, at a basic level. Now I'm talking. Yeah.
But the Buddha has also given so many methods in which you can combat all these things. The other thing he has preached is Dhana, Sila, Babana. Again, morality comes in, that's the second one. And Dhana is the giving, generosity. The way it releases you. I think they had conducted an experiment in one of the American universities recently, where they gave two groups of students, the same large amount of money each. One lot were told to go and enjoy yourself. The others were told to go out, look for people who are in need, do something for others. And they had to come back in a couple of weeks and report on it, what it made them, what they did, and what it made them feel like. And they found that the ones who had just spent it on themselves, by the time they had partied enough, they were left with a very flat feeling, whereas the others who went out and actually did something, students don't have a lot of money, so when they are given a large amount of money to go and help poor people or whatever, that it gave them a really good feeling, which lasted for a long time. So like that is the way of getting rid of craving and thinking of others. So there are many ways. And Sila, that we have been talking about, that is the practicing the good practice. And meditation, you find when you actually do them, little by little, its effect on you, and then you start seeing the world in a different way. All the things that are held out to you, oh, you can't live without this, you must have this, and then you start work, do some overtime, get the money, get that, and then, okay, it's there, So like that, it's basically that kind of, and little by little your life gets simplified, you find you're a happier person, not wanting less and less. Whatever you have, you enjoy it more, especially the time. Because at the end of the day, we cram our lives with so much stuff and then fall into bed exhausted. Still, there's so much left that we haven't done. And that's because we try to do too many things. So you have to allow yourself time, consider time as the most precious thing. And again, with the craving, there is craving and there is also grasping. I think Ajahn Brahm had described this very much, very clearly in one of his books. Okay, you get the lovely smell of coffee, of a cup of coffee someone has put in front of you. You had already had some food and drink, so you didn't really need it. Do you take it or do you reject? So that's the instant decision. If you say, oh, it's there, I will have it, that's grasping. So again, you might crave something, but if you don't grasp it, little by little, you don't find the need for it.
One last quick question.
Well, I would hold things, but
No.
anybody else got a question? So what you're saying, like, you mentioned the word simplify things, so you're actually, in a way, closing yourself down to open yourself up. And this idea, nowhere to go, no place to be, is what it's all about, really.
In a sense, yes. But it's not shutting down. Sometimes people think it's all about totally withdrawing. That's not quite right either. But you do go inwards to understand the mind. That is so.
Without totally collapsing.
Yes, yes. But simplifying life and the involvements helps to go to the inner journey. Thank you very much, everyone. Hopefully we'll meet next Saturday. And you have only 10 minutes for a cup of tea before the introductory meditation starts.